Well, Dr. Kari Odermann joins me now to discuss this U.S.-Iran tensions, Trump's recent comments, and what to expect. Good to have you, Dr. Kari. Now, straight to it, what are the implications of Trump's maximum pressure strategy on Iran's willingness to negotiate a new nuclear deal, and how will this approach impact regional stability?
Well, I think the first thing we have to address is there is a real disconnect between the new U.S. National Defense Strategy, which was just released a few days ago, and how there's discussions within the strategy about avoiding humiliation or strangling major rivals. And this exertion of this maximalist point of view seems to go against what it says in the strategy. And this also ties into the national security strategy, which was just released days before the national defense strategy. This maximalist pressure campaign against Iran is designed to inflict maximal economic and political pain, but who that really affects is everyday Iranians. And the takeaway from this in situations like this is there's been a pattern in the past where Iran has simply doubled down and become more defiant and less flexible. And that means normal people are suffering from the sanctions, but organizations like the Republican Guard have actually grown in power and influence. So when you see a squeeze like this of a country already under pressure, it tends to make them react more stubbornly, which is a problem because both the people in Iran and the people in the United States seem to appreciate strongman gestures where people aren't willing to make any type of compromise.
Well, how does Iran's missile program affect the negotiation dynamics? Plus, what are the consequences of Iran's involvement in any potential U.S.-Iran conflict?
Well, here's the thing. I think Israel and Washington have similar views, and Iran sees their missiles as a life jacket, where Israel and the United States see it more as a sign of the coming of the storm. They've based their entire security apparatus and their defense strategy around these missiles, and they're not very willing to give them up. They've also spent the last years developing these missiles further. And this is what I meant from the coming storm and how the Israelis and the Americans see it. As these missiles are developed further, become more technical, can be equipped with different types of payloads and have further range, that seems to be the foreshadowing for it developing its nuclear program further. So it comes down to looking at these missiles two different ways and how this will look on the bargaining table.
So given the U.S. deployment of military assets in the region, what are the most likely scenarios for escalation or de-escalation, and how could regional actors like Turkey and Saudi Arabia influence the situation?
What we're seeing right here is and that's important to note. And this is something that both Turkey and the Gulf states that are involved, they want calm deterrence. Now, this has a special brand, though. It's deterrence with a little bit of President Trump's social media seasoning, which adds a new twist to how it can be interpreted. It's important to understand that the Trump administration in 2018 walked away from a framework that actually would have prevented the situation we're in right now. And by walking away from the Iran nuclear deal, which set up guardrails and also indicated how far Iran was allowed to go in the development of their missile program, which there's a great overlap with if you look at the potential for their nuclear program. President Trump had said in 2018 that it was too soft and not effective. But within that deal was codified rules for dealing with this situation. And in 2018, when the Trump administration walked away from it, Iran began step by step to test the limits of the nuclear deal, and we're in the situation right now.
So, what are the key differences, Dr. Kari, between the current U.S.-Iran standoff and the previous confrontations, and how do domestic politics in both countries shape their respective strategies? I know you've, tried to give a background just before this question, but can you, tell us how these previously as against now, how it works and what to expect?
Well, here's the thing. You and I and everyone else hears the term unprecedented so often. So by looking back, I don't know if we're going to really get a better idea of what moving forward is going to be. We can look at some of the same factors that are going to be part of this negotiation and part of the standoff that's happening right now. And as I touched on your in your last question, the use of President Trump's rhetoric directed directly at the Iranian people is playing a role here that should not be downplayed. By giving these people hope and saying that the United States is locked, loaded, and ready to help, they've reevaluated the risk that they were taking. And regardless of what happens, there's a lot of trust that's been broken because of the amount of time the US has taken to react. I can't tell you what's going to be different about these negotiations, but I think you'll agree with me that most things involving President Trump and this current administration are different than in the past.
Right. So how can the U.S. balance its goals of preventing Iran's nuclear development and addressing its regional ambitions, given Iran's insistence on not negotiating its defense capabilities?
Well, both the U.S. administration and Iran are trying to save face at home. How can they negotiate this is a question that you have to look at less from the structures we used in the past to understand things. And we have to look at this in a type of regional web of alliances to understand what would benefit who and actually how much pressure the United States can put on the situation. Unfortunately, this is pure speculation, and the only thing the United States can do right now by showing up there is to try to deter. And they're there with, well, what the words of President Trump were, with an armada that can do business, and we've seen that. Some of the same equipment that was used off the coast of Nigeria, that was used to send Tomahawks into the Sokoto region and northeastern Nigeria. It's been tried, and it's evidence that the United States can and will use it in situations. So we can only see how much of this deterrence will happen. And if other actors involved, like the Republican Guard, if they would try to sabotage the talks, because they've actually benefited quite a bit from the situation in Iran and the pressure being put on the country from both the EU and the United States.
So, Dr. Kari, I'm wondering, what role can international organizations like the EU, the UN, and IAEA play in mediating the conflict, and what are the limitations of their influence? I mean, it's become, I don't know, it's become a thing of a weak point when you talk about international organizations such as the UN interfering, because we've had so many conflicts and it's like, we're still where we are.
Let's talk about the last one first, the International Atomic Energy Agency. They are a technical agency that still has quite a bit of credibility. And in early January, the Trump administration left, I believe it was 66 international treaty organizations. This is one of them that they didn't leave because of the importance of their work, and there's no replacement for it. So the International Atomic Energy Agency still is relevant here. They were the watchdogs, so to speak, that were part of the Iran nuclear deal, which the United States left. The EU, of course, can work to diplomatically try to ease tensions and find solutions. However, in the past week, the EU has also put sanctions on the Republican Guard in Iran. So relations there are also tense. The question for me is if the UN will remain relevant. If you look at it from the point of view of President Trump's Board of Peace and how he's working to set up a parallel organization of like-minded individuals. So I doubt the UN, although I still feel it's a relevant organization, will be utilized by the United States. It'll be the International Atomic Energy Agency, who we see actively throughout the world right now. They're also in the Zaporizhia region of Ukraine, trying to monitor that situation. So in terms of international organizations or groups that could have an influence here, it would really be the International Atomic Energy Agency that is going to play the most important role.
So what are the economic consequences of a U.S.-Iran conflict, particularly for global oil markets and regional trade? Because we know those routes, when you talk about oil markets, we know the business of it and that region, what role it plays.
Well, let's not over-intellectualize this. Let's just look at it from the Nigerian perspective and what happens around the kitchen table there. Of course, security issues in the Gulf states would put something like Brent crude from Nigeria in a better position. The price of the barrel could go from $70 to $80, which in the short term would have huge effects. But with stagnant economies globally and the cost of imports and food rising, it would only be a short-term gain. So there's not a lot of interest in negative economic impacts globally in the United States, Europe, or in Nigeria. And I think that the Trump administration is going to try to avoid a negative economic impact, but at the same time appear to be a strong man. And there's one point I need to make here. The United States left the Iran-Contra framework in 2018. It cost maybe tens of millions to administer each year, and administrative fees and other organization. And the flotilla or the armada that he has there right now costs between conservative estimate 20 to 30 million US dollars just for the ships a day. So if we're looking at the positive economic effects of some of Trump's policy, what's happened is the 2018 vision is having long-reaching effects.
So how might Iran's internal politics, including the role of the Supreme Leader and the Revolutionary Guard, impact its negotiation positions in response to U.S. pressure?
The Supreme Leader is the figurehead, but the real power and empowerment comes from the Republican Guard. They've were founded in 1979 and are probably the most sanctioned organization worldwide. But their strength has only grown as a result of the sanctions. And it's unfortunate to see that to avoid these sanctions, they've not only further developed, their infrastructure projects and construction and things to that effect, but they've got very complicated.
Sorry, Dr. Kari, that's the much we can do for now. Appreciate you for joining us on The World Well. That's the much we can take on The World today. Thank you so much for watching. I am Olije Wapera.